1492. Christopher Columbus stands on the shore of Hispaniola, holding a metal spear. The indigenous people have just told him something that doesn't make sense. They say black people came here before him, from the south and southeast, they said, carrying spears made from this strange metal they call guanin. Columbus is curious enough to send samples back to Spain for testing. When Spanish metallurgists analyze the alloy, they find something shocking. 18 parts gold, 6 parts silver, 8 parts copper. This exact ratio is identical to metal produced in West Africa, specifically Guinea, the same place Portuguese sailors claimed they heard stories about African canoes crossing the Atlantic. Columbus's own son later writes that his father heard reports in Guinea about Africans trading in Caribbean waters, not after European exploration began. Before. On his third voyage, Columbus actively searches for evidence of these West African vessels that supposedly drifted across the ocean. He's not dismissing these stories as impossible. He's investigating them as facts that might explain what he's finding in the New World. But if Africans reached the Americas before Columbus, how? And why does almost no one know about it? To understand what Columbus found, we need to go back nearly 2 centuries earlier. Cairo, 1324. The wealthiest man in the world sits in conversation with a scholar, about to reveal how he became emperor of Mali. Mansa Musa is on pilgrimage to Mecca when he tells this story. His predecessor became obsessed with a question: where does the ocean end? This wasn't curiosity. This was an obsession that consumed him. The emperor assembled 200 ships filled with crews and supplies and sent them westward into the Atlantic. Only one ship came back. The surviving captain described something terrifying. A river in the sea, he said, with a powerful current that swept the other vessels away. Most rulers would have stopped. This emperor did the opposite. He assembled 2,000 ships, half for men and provisions, half for himself and his court. He appointed Mansa Musa as regent and sailed into the Atlantic. That was the last we saw of him, Musa said, and so I became king. Here's what makes this extraordinary. The Mali Empire sat exactly where ocean currents flow straight toward the Americas. That mysterious river, the captain described, matches what we now call the Canary Current, flowing directly from West Africa to the Caribbean. This wasn't a primitive kingdom attempting the impossible. Mali in the early 1400s was one of the most sophisticated civilizations on Earth. When Mansa Musa traveled to Mecca, he brought 60,000 men, 12,000 servants, and 80 camels carrying 300 pounds of gold each. He spent so much gold in Cairo that he crashed the regional economy for 12 years. This empire had resources, organization, and maritime capability. West African peoples had navigated coastal waters for centuries. Large canoes carrying dozens of people plied trade routes along the Atlantic. Portuguese sailors later reported finding West African vessels far out in the ocean, some with trade goods for extended voyages. The geography favored westward travel. From Senegal or Guinea, the Canary Current and northeast trade winds push everything toward South America and the Caribbean. A vessel caught in these forces would reach the Americas, whether the crew intended it or not. So when Columbus found those spears with West African metallurgy, and when indigenous people told him about black visitors from the southeast, he wasn't hearing fantasy. He might have been hearing the echoes of Mali's lost fleet. But here's where the story gets complicated. No definitive African artifacts have been found in controlled archaeological excavations of pre-Columbian American sites. No West African pottery. No tools of clear African origin. No physical evidence that would conclusively prove contact. The metallurgical match of the guanin spears is fascinating but not conclusive on its own. The stories Columbus heard could have been about indigenous people who painted themselves, or about confusion in translation. Without archaeological proof, mainstream historians remain skeptical. Yet the absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. If a Mali fleet did reach the Americas, they may have arrived, interacted briefly with local populations, and disappeared into history without leaving durable traces archaeologists could find centuries later. But the Mali voyage isn't the only theory about African contact with the Americas. Some researchers point to evidence suggesting Africans may have reached the New World far earlier, over 3,000 years ago. In southern Mexico, archaeologists have discovered 17 colossal stone heads created by the Olmec civilization between 1200 and 400 years before the Common Era. These sculptures are massive, some weighing 25 tons and standing 11 feet tall. They depict human faces with remarkable detail. From the moment Spanish explorers first saw these heads in the 1600s, observers noted something striking. The faces have broad noses, full lips, and features that many interpreted as African in appearance. The first documented description in 1862 called the sculpture Ethiopian-looking. The Olmec carved these heads from solid basalt, moving multi-ton boulders over 60 miles from quarries to their cities. Each head appears to represent a different individual, wearing elaborate headdresses that some researchers have compared to African royal crowns or warrior helmets. Supporters of the African Olmec theory point to additional evidence. Some Olmec carvings show what appear to be ritual scarification patterns, similar to those practiced in West African cultures. Linguistic researchers have claimed to find similarities between Olmec symbols and West African Mande script, though these claims are highly disputed. The Olmec developed one of the earliest writing systems in the Americas, the Cascajal block, dated to around 650 years before the Common Era, may be the oldest example of New World writing. Some scholars argue these symbols resemble ancient African scripts, suggesting possible contact or influence. Botanist evidence adds another layer. Cotton, found in pre-Columbian America, is a hybrid of New World and Old World species. This hybridization could only occur if seeds somehow crossed the ocean, either through natural drift or human transport. Some researchers point to this as evidence of ancient transoceanic contact. To demonstrate that such voyages were possible, Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl, in 1970, sailed a papyrus reed boat called Ra II from Morocco to Barbados. He covered over 6,000 kilometers in 57 days, proving that ancient Egyptian-style vessels could cross the Atlantic using only natural currents and winds. If a 20th century crew with primitive technology could make this crossing, advocates argue, why couldn't ancient Africans have done the same thousands of years earlier? Despite these intriguing arguments, the vast majority of archaeologists and historians do not accept an African origin for the Olmec civilization or significant pre-Columbian African contact with the Americas. The reasons are straightforward and evidence-based. First, extensive excavations at Olmec sites have revealed a thoroughly indigenous American culture. The civilization developed gradually from earlier Mesoamerican societies, with clear continuity in pottery styles, architectural techniques, and cultural practices. There's no sudden appearance of foreign influences that would suggest outside contact. The colossal heads are now understood to represent Olmec rulers, or possibly elite ballgame players, not foreign visitors. Each sculpture has unique facial features, suggesting they portrayed specific individuals from the local population. What 19th century observers interpreted as African features can be explained as natural human variation or artistic conventions. Modern indigenous peoples from the Gulf Coast of Mexico often have facial features similar to those depicted on the Olmec heads. Assuming such features must be African reflects more about the observer's biases than about actual ancestry. No verified African artifacts have been found in pre-Columbian American contexts. No West African pottery fragments. No tools with African metallurgical signatures. No trade goods. No skeletal remains with African genetic markers. This absence of physical evidence is significant because if sustained contact occurred, some material trace should exist. Claims about Olmec writing resembling African scripts are considered fringe by specialists. The Olmec glyphs remain largely undeciphered, and no credible linguistic connection to African writing systems has been established through peer-reviewed research. The Smithsonian Institution and major archaeological organizations have reviewed these theories and found them lacking in evidentiary support. By the 1990s, most scholars who had previously entertained African Olmec connections had abandoned the hypothesis due to lack of proof. As one Mesoamerican archaeologist stated bluntly, there simply is no material evidence of any pre-Hispanic contact between the Old World and Mesoamerica before Columbus. The Olmec civilization represents indigenous American ingenuity and achievement, not African influence. Yet even skeptical historians acknowledge that some pieces of this puzzle are genuinely intriguing and deserve continued investigation. Medieval Arabic geographers wrote about Atlantic voyages long before Columbus. The 12th century cartographer Al-Idrisi recorded an account of 8 sailors from Lisbon who ventured westward and supposedly reached an island with civilized people. Remarkably, they claimed to meet an Arabic-speaking interpreter for the local king. The Piri Reis map of 1513, drawn by an Ottoman admiral, accurately depicts parts of South American coastline with longitude coordinates that seem too precise for early European exploration. Piri Reis claimed he based his map on older sources, possibly including charts from before Columbus. Botanical evidence presents real mysteries. Certain plant species appear on both sides of the Atlantic in ancient contexts that are difficult to explain. The bottle gourd, originally from Africa or Asia, appears in prehistoric American sites, likely having floated across the ocean and been adopted by indigenous peoples. Some researchers have reported finding traces of cocaine and nicotine in ancient Egyptian mummies. Since these substances come from New World plants, it raised questions about possible contact. However, these findings remain controversial and haven't been reliably replicated. Most likely explanations involve contamination or misidentification rather than actual pre-Columbian contact. Portuguese records from the 1500s claimed West African canoes were found far out in the Atlantic, with trade goods aboard. These reports suggest African mariners were capable of extended ocean voyages, even if we can't prove they reached the Americas. The metallurgical match Columbus reported between Caribbean guanin and West African gold alloys remains unexplained. While not definitive proof, it's precisely the kind of detail that's difficult to dismiss entirely. The debate over pre-Columbian African contact raises important questions about how we construct historical narratives and whose achievements get recognized. For centuries, European-centered history portrayed Columbus as bringing civilization to primitive peoples in an empty wilderness. This narrative erased indigenous American achievements and ignored the sophisticated civilizations that existed long before European arrival. The African contact theories emerged partly as a corrective to this Eurocentrism. They highlight African maritime capabilities and challenge assumptions about who could accomplish transoceanic voyages. The Mali Empire's wealth, organization, and ambition deserve recognition regardless of whether their ships reached the Americas. These theories also remind us that history is full of unexpected connections. The Norse reached Newfoundland around the year 1000, 5 centuries before Columbus, leaving clear archaeological evidence at L'Anse aux Meadows. This proves that pre-Columbian transatlantic contact was possible and did occur. If Vikings from Scandinavia could cross the North Atlantic, is it really impossible that Africans crossed the South Atlantic using favorable currents? The question challenges us to think beyond conventional historical frameworks. However, enthusiasm for these theories must be balanced with evidential standards. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. The desire to correct Eurocentric bias is admirable, but good history depends on following evidence wherever it leads, not forcing it to fit preferred narratives. Now, let's understand what we can actually say. Based on current evidence, here's what historians can state with reasonable confidence. The Mali Empire, under Mansa Musa's predecessor, likely did attempt transoceanic exploration. The account recorded by al-Umari appears genuine, and there's no obvious reason for Mansa Musa to have fabricated the story. Whether any ships actually reached the Americas remains unproven, but is oceanographically plausible. West African peoples had sophisticated maritime capabilities and ventured far into the Atlantic. Portuguese explorers encountered evidence of this in the 1500s. The possibility of accidental or intentional African voyages reaching the Americas cannot be dismissed entirely. The Olmec civilization was an indigenous American culture without verified African influence. The colossal heads represent local rulers, and extensive archaeological work shows continuous development from earlier Mesoamerican societies. Claims of African origins for the Olmec are not supported by current evidence. Some botanical and metallurgical evidence suggests possible transoceanic exchanges, but these could result from natural drift, bird migration, or other non-human vectors, rather than deliberate voyages. More research is needed. No conclusive archaeological or genetic evidence of pre-Columbian African presence in the Americas has been verified through peer-reviewed research. This doesn't prove it never happened, but it means we cannot currently confirm it did happen. The contrast with Norse contact is instructive. Viking voyages to North America left physical remains, were recorded in sagas, and can be verified through multiple lines of evidence. African contact theories lack this level of documentation and material proof. The story of possible African voyages to pre-Columbian America remains open to new discoveries. Future archaeological work might uncover artifacts that change our understanding. Genetic studies of ancient populations could reveal unexpected connections. Underwater archaeology might find shipwrecks that rewrite history. Several questions remain worth investigating. If Mali sent thousands of ships into the Atlantic, what happened to them? Did any survive the crossing? If they reached the Americas, why did they leave no clear trace? Or might evidence exist that hasn't yet been found or properly identified? The metallurgical similarities Columbus reported deserve further study. Were the Spanish assayers accurate in their analysis? Could this be verified with modern techniques? Are there other examples of West African metallurgy in Caribbean contexts that haven't been properly examined? The Olmec heads continue to fascinate researchers. While mainstream scholars reject African origins, the sculptures remain enigmatic. Complete understanding of Olmec culture is still developing. Future discoveries might shed new light on these monuments. Ocean current patterns and ancient navigation capabilities need continued research. Computer simulations of drift voyages could help determine where vessels caught in various currents would likely end up. This might identify promising locations for future archaeological searches. The notion of Africans sailing to America before Columbus occupies an uncertain space between documented history and tantalizing possibility. It's a story supported by circumstantial evidence and plausible scenarios, but lacking conclusive proof. This doesn't make it worthless. The theories encourage us to think expansively about human capabilities and ancient global connections. They challenge Eurocentric assumptions and honor African achievements in exploration and navigation. The Mali Empire's maritime ambitions, real or legendary, speak to a civilization confident enough to venture into the unknown. Whether Mansa Musa's predecessor reached the Americas or perished attempting the voyage, the endeavor itself represents human curiosity and courage. The debate also illustrates how history is constructed. What counts as evidence? How much proof is needed to overturn conventional narratives? Who decides what theories merit serious investigation? These questions matter because they shape our understanding of the past. For communities seeking to reclaim histories erased by colonialism, theories of African achievement hold cultural significance beyond strict historical proof. They represent resistance to narratives that portrayed Africans as passive recipients of history rather than active agents of exploration and innovation. At the same time, good scholarship requires honesty about evidence limitations. Wanting something to be true doesn't make it true. The most respectful approach to African history is to rigorously document actual achievements while acknowledging what remains uncertain. Did an African empire sail to America before Columbus? The honest answer is we don't know for certain. The story Mansa Musa told in 1324 is recorded history. The Mali Empire had capability, motivation, and favorable ocean conditions for such a voyage. The possibility cannot be dismissed. But possibility isn't the same as proof. No definitive archaeological evidence has been found. No genetic markers. No verified artifacts. The theories remain speculative, however intriguing they may be. What we can say is this: African civilizations were far more sophisticated and ambitious than Eurocentric histories acknowledged. The Mali Empire commanded resources that rivaled or exceeded European kingdoms. West African mariners ventured far into the Atlantic. These achievements deserve recognition, regardless of whether they include reaching the Americas. The Olmec created one of Mesoamerica's great civilizations through indigenous American ingenuity. Their monumental art and early writing represent remarkable human achievement. Attributing this to outside influence diminishes rather than honors their accomplishments. Perhaps someday new evidence will emerge that proves pre-Columbian African contact, an undiscovered shipwreck, a genetic signature, an artifact in an unexpected location. History is full of surprises, and tomorrow's excavation might rewrite what we think we know. Until then, the story remains what it is: a fascinating historical mystery, a reminder that human capability has always exceeded our expectations, and a challenge to think beyond the boundaries conventional narratives have drawn. The ocean kept its secrets well. Whether African ships crossed those waters before Columbus may never be known with certainty. But the fact that we're still asking the question, still investigating, still willing to challenge established narratives, that itself tells us something important about how history should be studied with open minds and critical eyes, following evidence wherever it leads.